The statue of Saint Volodymyr has become a shrine in London's Holland Park to victims of the latest conflict for the soul of that nation. But Russians see him as Vladimir the Great, the founder of the Russian Orthodox Church in Kiev more than 1,000 years ago. And it's that battle for the history of the nation that has precipitated today's crisis. It's made relations between Russia and the rest of Europe the worst since the end of the Cold War. Today, the EU has imposed sanctions on Russia, and it's a crisis that does not look as if it's going to go away very quickly.
There has been a ceasefire which has more or less held for more than 3 weeks now. So it's possible the fighting is over, but Ukraine is facing a very, very difficult winter. The economy is in a real mess. They may or may not get any Russian gas this winter, so there's going to have to be real efforts to economize on energy. Economically, the crisis may continue to deepen in Ukraine. I think within the bounds of the goals Vladimir Putin set himself in Ukraine, he has in a sense won. He's got Crimea, which has proven very popular with the Russian people. He probably has got a kind of frozen conflict in the east which will enable him to continue to put pressure on Ukraine and make it difficult to stabilize the country and for it to integrate with Europe and with NATO. So within those aims, he's achieved them, but at a huge cost to his own economy because of the impact of sanctions, and at a huge cost in terms of his relations with the West, his relations with the outside world, his relations with international business.
He's very afraid of democratization in Ukraine because that would isolate Russia even more as an autocratic and corrupt government. So he is, I think, having a very short-term policy. And if you look at it in terms of costs, the cost is huge. Putin, for example, had to actually invade eastern Ukraine, send Russian military and Russian armaments, and that certainly was not what he had planned to do originally. He was hoping that eastern Ukraine would fall like a ripe fruit.
One of the miscalculations that Moscow has made, and President Putin is probably himself, is that the Russians thought that they would be welcomed in Ukraine with open arms, and this has not been the case.
René Newbery was Finnish ambassador in Moscow and Berlin and is a very close observer of both Russia and the EU.
The Ukrainian crisis, which is very much a Russian crisis, has solidified the European Union, it has solidified NATO.
The European Union is proving that it exists. That is, 28 member states can agree that Vladimir Putin is a threat to European security, and that it's the only tool we have to tell Vladimir Putin that we don't accept his policy of aggression in Ukraine.
Sanctions were the only tool the EU had to express its disapproval. But Mr. Putin never expected the 28 to be able to agree on such tough measures. The decision was in the end unanimous, but Pierre Vimont, Brussels' top diplomat, admits it wasn't easy.
We are facing now the prospect of these sanctions hurting deeply some of the member states at the moment when they're facing big difficulties in their own economic situation. This is why they have accepted to go for that second package of sanctions, but they have asked for a very deep assessment of what all this means as we're moving on.
I think that the sanctions that were imposed by the European Union are probably going to be more effective over the long term than many of us first thought. At first they seemed rather weak, but actually the successive rounds have been stronger, and they're kind of slow burn. What they will do is make it much more difficult, for example, for the Russian oil industry to develop in the future, to build up production from frontier areas which Russia will need to sustain its oil output in coming years. It looks as though there is really a change of paradigm in terms of Russia's relationship with the West. It is going to be a much more difficult and combative, hostile relationship, probably for a long time to come now.
It is very difficult to perceive business as usual in a situation where Ukraine is has been destabilized. Eastern Ukraine is in the hands of rebels, and Crimea is occupied. And to get legal title to Crimea, Russia needs to agree with Kiev. It is Ukrainian territory as far as we are concerned, as far as the European Union is concerned, and to change that, you need a peace treaty.
There are books on the Crimean War of the 19th century here on the shelves of the Ukrainian Institute in London. That was the time when most of Europe was last lined up against Russia over possession of that peninsula on the Black Sea. And now it's Crimea again that could hold the key to the end of this crisis. Can Russia and an independent Ukraine agree on who owns it? Until they do, it cannot be business as usual again. This is Quentin Peel for the Financial Times in London.